You step through the gilded doors of what you've always imagined royalty to be, a palace of marble, gold, and grace. The floor beneath you gleams like a mirror, reflecting 1,000 candles whose flames dance across priceless tapestries and polished stone. The air is thick with rosewater, ambergris, and the whispers of power. Ladies in silk glide past like dreams made flesh, their laughter crystalline, their fingers heavy with gems that could buy a kingdom. It's beautiful, too beautiful. You take a breath, ready to inhale the essence of majesty, and that's when it hits you. Not awe, not wonder, but stench. Something sickly sweet, almost cloying. A perfume far too desperate, struggling to hide something darker beneath. The sour metallic scent of rot, of sweat, of breath gone bad, of bodies that haven't touched water in months. The fairy tale unravels, thread by fetid thread. This isn't Disney, this isn't Bridgerton, this is reality, raw, unwashed, and crawling. The woman who just passed you, her sleeves dripping with pearls and her gaze sharp as a blade, she hasn't bathed since last moon. Her face is not skin, but layers of lead and vinegar built up like geological strata of slow suicide. That queen you admire in portraits? She is rotting beneath her rouge. That king in portraits of grandeur? He reeks of meat and infection. His hat is crawling, literally. You've been lied to. Royalty, the kind etched into childhood books and Hollywood dramas, never truly existed. What did exist were bodies dressed in jewels and decay, people who ruled nations while their scalps crawled with lice and their bowels emptied into gold-inlaid pots held by servants with the titles of dukes. You thought power smelled of roses, but power, real power, smells of ammonia and dying teeth. Welcome to the court of kings and queens, where appearances ruled and hygiene never stood a chance. This is not the story you were told. This is the one they never wanted written down. Let's begin. Part 1. Skin Deep, the Curse of Beauty. The sun hasn't yet risen over Greenwich Palace, but the fires have been burning since midnight. You are a servant, nameless, invisible, and today you've drawn the worst assignment in the English court, Her Majesty's monthly bath. Once a month, that's all. The most powerful woman in the known world, who commands fleets and conquers minds, bathes once. A royal ritual that feels more like an exorcism than an act of cleanliness. You walk the long stone corridors with buckets of boiling water balanced on aching arms. 20 buckets, 30. The steam mingles with the cold morning air, and the wooden tub in the Queen's chamber stands waiting like an execution block, lined with the finest linen, not for luxury, but to keep royal skin from splinters. It's not comfort, it's preservation. But no one, not even the fire stokers or water haulers, dreads this bath more than you, because you know what happens next. She enters, Queen Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, the Empress of the Seas, cloaked in silks and myth. But as her robes fall away, the illusion begins to rot. You don't see a woman. You see a body buried alive in poisoned whiteness. Her face isn't flesh. It's a mask of Venetian ceruse, vinegar and white lead, slathered on every morning for decades. Never removed, never cleansed. Each new layer laid atop the last, until what's left is no longer skin, but plasterwork, cracked and crumbling like a forgotten tomb. She steps into the bath, and the water changes, not gradually, instantly, from clear to gray, from warmth to something else entirely, something alive, a chemical funeral. The lead peels from her cheeks in long curling strips, like sunburnt paint from rotted wood. The vinegar base hisses against her pores. The scent that rises is something you cannot name. Not sweat, not metal, not perfume, but a hybrid of suffering. Something old and wrong that coats your throat and makes your stomach lurch. You do not gag. You cannot. A wretch in the presence of a queen is treason. Instead, you stare into the tub and watch as history dissolves, the sweat of councils, the grime of war rooms, the powder of pageants, all liquefying into a soup of filth and ambition. Her scalp, once hidden beneath wigs and crowns, now reveals open sores, the price of weight and artifice. Her hair has long since given up. The lead has eaten it. What remains is a fragile lattice of brittle strands, soaked in animal grease, curled into hiding beneath her wigs. She sits in silence, dignified, regal, dying. You hold the sponge. You hold your breath. You watch the face of a monarch slide away into the water like a fading mask. And you realize this is not beauty. This is bondage. Each morning, new paint will be applied, not because she wants it, but because she must. Because to appear anything less than divine is to invite death, political, personal, eternal. Because a queen cannot sweat. A queen cannot bleed. A queen cannot be human. And so, she becomes something else. A marble goddess carved from lead, propped up by servants and illusions, adored by poets, and poisoned by her own reflection. She smiles with blackening teeth. She speaks with breath that wilts roses. She rules through pain so intimate, so constant, it has no name. And all the while, her body rots beneath the white. You will empty the tub. You will carry that water, thick with makeup, blood, and secrets, down to the servants' quarters. You will never speak of what you saw. Because this is royalty, not angels, not monsters, just women, trapped in beauty they cannot wash off. Part 2. When cleanliness became heresy. Forget soap, forget water. In 15th century Spain, to bathe was to sin. You stand beneath the heavy stone arches of a church in Castile, your head bowed, your body cloaked in dirt, not from poverty, but from obedience, because to scrub your skin is to scrub away grace, because Queen Isabella, the most devout woman in Christendom, believes that filth is next to godliness and that soap is a gateway to Satan. And if the Queen believes it, the Inquisition enforces it. You hear the sermons, you feel the stares. Clean clothes mean you're hiding something. A bar of soap is more dangerous than a blade. A clean face is evidence of Islamic heresy. And if you're Muslim in newly conquered Granada, that means death. You watch the baths close. You watch fountains dry. You watch traditions collapse under the weight of fire and crosses. The hammams, those sacred places of ritual washing and quiet reflection, are shuttered, bricked up, condemned. Not because they spread disease, but because they symbolize the enemy, the Moors. Their cleanliness, their order, their science, all seen now as signs of evil. The edict is clear. Dirt is devotion. To stink is to suffer, and suffering is holy. If your child cries from itching, if her scalp bleeds from lice, rejoice, for she is being sanctified through pain. If your skin cracks from weeks of sweat, be grateful, for you are not tempted by vanity. If your neighbors gossip that you smell like flowers, beware. You might be accused of consorting with devils, because somewhere in the catacombs, a man in black robes is keeping notes. He's heard that your garments are too white. He's seen the water bill from your servants. He's noticed the faint scent of lavender when you walk past. And so one night, the knock comes. Not loud, never loud, just enough to stop your breath. They take you. They question you. Did you wash this week? Did your children wash? Where is the soap? Where is the soap? You deny, you tremble, but they find it. A sliver, a scent, a whisper of rebellion. And then the fire comes. You are not burned because you plotted treason. You are not burned because you worshiped a law. You are burned because you refused to rot. And so, Spain, mighty Spain, declares war on water. The queen herself, in all her sanctity, is said to have bathed only twice in her life, once when she was born and once when she married. Not because she was lazy or careless, but because she believed that purity was not of the body, but of the spirit, and filth was its shield. Across oceans, her ships bring this gospel of grime to new worlds. In the Caribbean, clean-skinned islanders who bathe daily in rivers and streams are horrified by the arrival of conquistadors who haven't touched water in months, whose armor stinks of death, whose breath smells like decay. The natives offer them soap. The Spanish offer them swords. They tell them, stop bathing. They tell them, your cleanliness is pagan. They tell them, God prefers you filthy. And so, entire civilizations are forced to abandon not just their gods, but their soap, their rituals, their hygiene, their health. Diseases explode. Skin infections run rampant. Children die not from war, but from dirty hands that could not be washed. And when the people cry out, the priests respond, it is not illness, it is penance. You cannot see it, but this is a war, not of armies, but of ideologies. Between a world that saw cleanliness as harmony and a world that saw it as heresy. And the latter won. Because sometimes the most devastating kind of conquest is not the one that kills your body, but the one that convinces you your suffering is holy. Part 3. Palaces of Parasites. You've seen the paintings. You've heard the music. Versailles, the glittering jewel of France, where elegance was born, where civilization bloomed under the Sun King's golden gaze. But no canvas captures the crawling, no symphony echoes the scratching, because behind the silk, beneath the wigs, and inside the brocade, there is movement, tiny, relentless, hungry. This is not a palace, it is a nest. Chateau de Versailles, home to over 10,000 nobles, guards, priests, servants, and whores, all pressed together in a gilded monument to human decay. There are no working toilets. The pipes leak into the kitchens. The walls sweat. The carpets drink urine like expensive sponges. And the air, thick with perfume and filth, is barely breathable. Yet what stalks these halls most loyally are lice. They crawl in the seams of corsets. They hide in powdered wigs. They nest in the wigs of kings and the powdered curls of queens. They feast on blood that rules empires. King James I of England, known for his intellect and political cunning, never bathed. His garments were his second skin, worn day and night until they fell apart. His hat remained glued to his head by layers of grease, dandruff, and lice eggs. Those who sat beside him left the chamber not with ideas, but with infestations. Lady Anne Clifford wrote it plainly. We went in clean and came out lousy. Imagine, you bow before your monarch in a gown worth a castle, and minutes later, you feel the first tickle, a whisper on the neck, a nibble near your ear. You try not to react. Etiquette demands stillness, dignity, but your scalp is alive. Your thighs crawl. Your armpits itch like fire. Welcome to the royal body, where parasites are permanent guests and everyone pretends not to notice. It is not just discomfort, it is epidemic. Lice spread typhus, jail fever, a disease that killed more soldiers than any war. And yet, these elegant death carriers were treated like nuisances, not threats, because to acknowledge the lice was to acknowledge the filth, and to acknowledge the filth was to shatter the illusion. And illusion was everything. Women wore towering hairstyles built with cages of wire and padding, sprayed with powders and glued with bear fat. Yes, bear fat. Thick, rancid meat grease melted and combed into the hair to hold shape. It smelled like death. It invited everything with wings, teeth, or legs, and still it was fashion. These coiffures stayed in place for weeks, even months. Underneath, the scalp festered. Lice laid eggs, fleas bred, ticks buried. Entire microcosms of life feeding on rotting flesh beneath curls of powdered pink and blue. The solution? Ivory scratching sticks, delicately carved with gold filigree, slipped through the hair like weapons of denial. Women would excuse themselves from court to scratch their heads in private. Some didn't bother to hide it. Scratching became art, technique, survival. The men were no better. Military officers in full regalia, fur collars crawling, bishops whose mitres hid bald, infected scalps, dandies with perfumed gloves and rotting wigs, and all of them, every single one, itching. But none dared speak of it. Instead, the court developed a code, a choreography of pestilence. Stand downwind of the Queen. Don't sit on that couch. It's Sir Robert's, and he's known for ticks. Don't brush against Lady Armande. She carries fleas from her poodle. Wear gloves at all times. Shake hands lightly. Never hug. Never hug. Because in this court, intimacy was infestation. And the worst part, they knew. Letters survive. Private diaries. Confessions written in candlelight. They speak of itching, of shame, of silent suffering beneath powdered perfection. But they also speak of resignation, because to be clean was impossible, because to protest was vulgar, because to stink and suffer silently was noble. You see, the palace didn't just house parasites. It bred a parasite mindset, one where everyone knew the truth, but no one spoke it. One where the cost of beauty was decay, one where royalty wasn't defined by grace, but by how elegantly you endured the rot. And so they lived, not in splendor, but in denial. Each courtier, each queen, each king, a host to tiny kingdoms, thriving beneath crowns. Part 4. Groom of the Stool. Power wipes. In most kingdoms, the closer you get to the throne, the closer you get to power. But in Tudor England, the man closest to the throne, literally, wasn't a general or a bishop or a lord. He was a toilet servant, and yet no one held more influence. His title, Groom of the Stool. His duty, to wipe the king's ass. Not a metaphor, not an insult. A full-time ceremonial state-recognized position to carry the king's portable toilet, to attend him during defecation, to clean him afterward carefully, methodically, with linen cloths or bare hands. It sounds humiliating, but in the grotesque theater of royal life, it was one of the most powerful roles in the entire court. Because power, real, raw, absolute power, doesn't exist in the throne room. It exists in the chamber behind it, in the shadows, where the air smells of meat and blood and rot, where a man of noble birth kneels before a monarch's bare, infected backside and whispers counsel. The groom knew everything: what the king ate, how often he passed waste, the color, the texture, the presence of blood, the intensity of strain. He could predict illness before the court physician. He could sense shifts in mood from the scent of the king's stool. He could delay wars and accelerate marriages based on how quickly the king finished defecating. And in exchange for this grotesque loyalty, he was rewarded with access. Unfiltered, uncensored, unwatched. No advisor got more alone time. No minister saw the king so vulnerable. No one else cleaned the ruler of half the known world while listening to him mutter state secrets between bowel movements. The groom became not a servant, but a confessor. He listened to royal grumbles of stomach and of soul. He heard frustrations about parliament, about courtiers, about wives. He watched the king bleed from hemorrhoids. He cleaned pus from open sores. He inhaled every consequence of indulgence and gluttony and disease. And he never flinched, because flinching would cost him everything. Imagine Henry VIII, bloated and infected, his ulcerated leg leaking through bandages, sweat soaking his robes. He sits on the close stool, a velvet-cushioned wooden box with a removable basin. And behind him, on one knee, is a nobleman, a man of high birth, a man whose ancestors commanded armies. Now he wipes, not quickly, not carelessly, but with precision, like a priest cleaning a relic. Because the royal arse is sacred, because to touch it is to touch the divine. And then the king speaks, "Send Norfolk to Calais, marry Anne, but keep Jane close. Cut off Cromwell's head," just like that. Empires shift, all while the smell of feces rises like incense in a private chapel of state. This man, the groom, might be the only person who sees the king not as myth, but as meat, not as majesty, but as mammal, not as sovereign, but as suffering. But no one mocks him. No one laughs. Because in a world where everyone fights for a whisper of influence, he holds the king's most literal secrets. And secrets are currency. He is bribed, he is courted, he is feared. Foreign ambassadors try to win him over. Nobles pretend not to gag in his presence. The court smiles at him, carefully, calculating, because a man who wipes the king's ass can also wipe out your career. His family gains land. His sons marry upward. He becomes a fixture in every decision, every deal, every disaster. And yet, behind all the politics and ceremony, he remains something else. A man kneeling in human waste, a body bent over another's body, a pair of hands, stained with power and filth alike. He sleeps in silk, but wakes to the smell of digested venison. He dines with dukes, but starts his day with infected feces. He moves between two worlds, the perfumed lies of court and the steaming truth of digestion. And no matter how high he rises, he always returns to the same place, behind the throne, on his knees, with a cloth. Part 5. The Milk of Death. You are starving. It is winter in Hanover. Your children haven't eaten in 2 days. The cold scrapes your bones from the inside, and your breath is a ghost in the air. And then, like a miracle, a servant appears, cloaked in fur, gloved in silk, holding a metal pail still warm to the touch. Milk, fresh, rich, creamy. A gift, they say, from the Countess. You fall to your knees in gratitude. You weep, you cross yourself. You don't question the taste. A little sour, perhaps, but that's winter milk. You feed it to your baby. You warm it for your son. You save the last few drops for your husband, and you believe. You believe in the kindness of nobles, but what you do not know, what no one dares to say, is that this milk has just come from a bath, not a dairy. A bath. The Countess, highborn, diseased, decaying, had lain in it for hours. Her body blistered from syphilis, her skin raw, flaking open in places, her breath foul, her flesh ruined. She soaked in that milk like a corpse soaks in embalming fluid. It wasn't indulgence, it wasn't beauty, it was desperation. They called it therapeutic. They said the lactic acid soothed the sores, the warmth softened the lesions, the cream masked the rot. She could no longer walk without pain. Her face had collapsed in places. Her teeth fell from her gums like rotted fruit. And so, in a chamber smelling of blood and sour perfume, she was lowered, slowly, into a tub of milk drawn from 20 cows. And when she rose, the milk was no longer white. It was pink, tinged with infection, curdled with skin, and instead of discarding it, they poured it into pails, covered it, and gave it away as charity. To the poor, to you. It wasn't malice, not in the way we think of it. It was worse, obliviousness wrapped in benevolence, a conviction that generosity, no matter how grotesque, is always righteous. That being noble means anything you offer must be good because you offered it, even if that gift is a warm bath of slow death. The Countess likely thought herself saintly. She believed she was sharing her excess, that if the poor were cold, then warm milk was mercy, that to waste it would be unchristian, that the people needed her charity more than she needed modesty, decency, or hygiene. But she was no saint. She was a vector, a walking disease. And that pail of milk, that sacred steaming pail, was a biological weapon cloaked in grace. You don't know, not at first, not until your baby begins to cough, not until your son's lips turn purple, not until the fever spreads across your house like fire through dry thatch. You bury one, then another, then another. The priest says God is testing you. The doctor says it's just a winter illness. The Countess sends her condolences, and more milk. The cycle repeats. The peasants die. The nobles sigh, and history calls it charity. No records are kept of the children who drank disease. No monuments are built to the bodies emptied by kindness. No punishment is given to those who turned a bath of sickness into an offering. Because in royal courts, intent outweighs consequence. The appearance of virtue is more valuable than the cost of it. And so, centuries later, the Countess of Hanover is remembered in the footnotes of a noble ledger, a generous woman who gave milk to the poor. But her milk was not white, and her soul, like her bathwater, was never clean. You see now, benevolence can kill. And in palaces where suffering wears pearls and perfume, death often arrives with a smile and a silver pail. Part 6. Versailles, the golden latrine. From a distance, Versailles gleams like a hallucination. Golden gates, endless mirrors, silk that flows like water. The Sun King's masterpiece, a palace that dared to outshine the heavens, but step closer and the illusion dies, not slowly, instantly. Because Versailles, for all its grandeur, was not a palace. It was a toilet. You walk through the hall of mirrors, but your shoes squelch against wet fabric. Urine-soaked silk, discarded in corners like used napkins. The scent of roses fights and loses against a rising tide of human waste. The perfumes are strong, yes, but not strong enough. Nothing ever is. Over 10,000 people lived here. Nobles, soldiers, servants, parasites in powdered wigs and velvet coats. But there were no functioning sewage systems. The latrines overflowed. The pipes burst. The floors seeped. The walls whispered of mildew and mold. Where did it all go? Anywhere. Everywhere. Women relieved themselves behind curtains. Men pissed in the hallways. Chamber pots overflowed onto priceless carpets. And when there was no pot, they squatted. In the stairwells, behind drapes, even in the royal chapel. One day, Marie Antoinette, Queen of Diamonds, Queen of Decadence, walked across an interior courtyard only to be struck from above by a torrent of human waste hurled from an open window. She screamed, the nobles gasped, and the servants apologized, politely, as if it were just another Tuesday, because it was. This wasn't a disaster. This was Versailles, the palace that outgrew itself, the monument to ego so bloated, so intoxicated with its own reflection, that it forgot human bodies produce waste. Louis XII, the Sun King himself, believed cleanliness was political. But he misunderstood what kind. He demanded polished floors and powdered wigs, not plumbing. He obsessed over ceremony and symmetry, not sanitation. He thought beauty could be built on top of rot, and that rot would stay hidden. It didn't. Servants cleaned for 20 hours a day, but it was never enough. The waste outpaced them. It always does. Below the bedrooms, the pipes leaked into kitchens. The food tasted of metal. The wine smelled like mildew. The royal children played beside puddles of excrement, their silk slippers stained with bacteria and lies. And still the balls continued. Still the orchestras played. Still the courtiers bowed and twirled and curtsied through a fog of feces and decay. Because to acknowledge the filth would be to puncture the myth. And the myth of power, of nobility, of divinely ordained rule was more fragile than porcelain, more delicate than lace. It could not withstand the weight of a single truth, that they lived like animals in cages of gold. Etiquette evolved to accommodate the horror. There were rules for where to defecate during Mass, positions to stand in to avoid the worst smells, hand signals to warn of fresh puddles. Fashion itself became a coping mechanism. Women's gowns grew wider not for beauty, but to mask where they squatted. Multiple layers of petticoats served as absorbent padding, soaking urine as they walked. The court stank, but no one said a word. And so, Versailles became a machine of denial. Foreign ambassadors arrived expecting Eden. They left retching. Some wrote in secret letters home, I have never known such filth, not even in the slums of Constantinople. But Louis didn't care. He had mirrors, thousands of them, all pointed inward. He had gardens, vast and geometric, where the smell still lingered. He had control, even if that control reeked of sweat, rot, and perfume-slicked sewage. And perhaps that's the most terrifying thing of all. They knew, the nobles, the servants, the king. They all knew Versailles was a palace of Sur, but they accepted it. They adjusted. They adapted because it was beautiful, because it was royal, because to be part of it, even drowning in filth, was still better than being outside, clean, and forgotten. Versailles wasn't just a palace. It was a mirror of an entire civilization, a place where gold covered rot, where elegance cloaked infection, where power smiled while standing ankle deep in its own waste. And when the revolution came, it didn't come for the gowns. It didn't come for the jewels. It came because the people outside finally realized the gods in gilded halls couldn't even clean up after themselves. Now step back. Look at what you've seen. 10 parts of rot wrapped in velvet, 10 rooms of stench masked by roses, 10 stories where beauty was not salvation, but sentence. Because beneath the lace gloves and powdered faces, they were not gods. They were prisoners. Prisoners of etiquette, of image, of silence, trapped in bodies they couldn't cleanse, lives they couldn't escape, standards they couldn't meet, yet couldn't abandon. They were born into thrones that didn't permit sweat, crowns that didn't allow imperfection, and mirrors that always lied. The queens, they smiled while their scalps bled. They commanded armies while lice colonized their wigs. They ruled nations while their wombs decayed from poison they applied themselves. The kings, they judged men while defecating into velvet. They signed treaties in rooms that reeked of themselves. They waged wars while too bloated to bathe. The courtiers, they bowed in silk, itching, infected, eyes watering from breath and rot and perfume that could not hide the truth. They all knew, and they all stayed quiet, because the smell of power is stronger than the stench of death, because status is addictive, because rot, if it sparkles, is still envied, and we, centuries later, we kept the fairy tale. We painted them in glory. We gilded their suffering. We sold their images to children as bedtime stories. But the truth? The truth is that royalty was not beautiful. It was maggots in silk, decay on a golden throne, human suffering weaponized into theater. So the next time you see a crown, remember what held it in place. Not grace, not divinity, but pins driven into scalps crawling with insects. The next time you admire a portrait, remember what the paint hides. Black teeth, bleeding gums, eyes dulled by lead and despair. And when you hear stories of noble blood, ask yourself what kind of blood festers when never allowed to be washed clean. This is the truth beneath the perfume. This is the fairy tale with the skin peeled back. This is the perfumed grave, not a story of kings and queens, but of corpses and crowns,